Hi, I'm Jim.
And I'm Becca.
And we are professional Englishists.
Today, Jim and I were hoping that we could tell you a little bit more about ourselves so that we can kind of build up some credibility. You can understand our background in English and grammar and teaching and where we get some of our authority for saying what we're saying. So I'm going to start. And I have a bachelor's in creative writing with a minor in history, and now I've got my master's in English literature, where I taught as a TA for 3 years. English, rhetoric, composition, 101, 102, 220, 290, and a class of beginning literature for our local community college. And now I'm currently getting my master's in TESOL, which is teaching English as a second language. So I'm currently teaching English second language learners, which is a whole new challenge when it comes to writing and speaking and grammar. So that's been a lot of fun. I got into English mostly because I am a reader. I read everything. My thesis was on cyborgs and androids in science fiction. So I'm kind of a huge geek. I read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi. I do like the classics. I read the classics. I love poetry. I'll read nonfiction. But out of everything, you're mostly going to probably hear about a lot of fantasy and sci-fi from this side of the room. It's just an interest that we both share, but I think that it's one that I tend to focus on more. So one of my favorite authors is Neil Gaiman. I love Neil Gaiman because I can tell from what he writes that he reads the mythology, he reads the folklore, and he has done a lot of reading on his own, and he incorporates a lot of that into his writing. And so I can see a lot of the literary ties and his references in his work, which is just amazing to me. I also really enjoy Stephen King just for his voice. I love how he says what he says. Sometimes when you link up just good words and phrases and timing, the right punctuation, it creates the most beautiful sentence. And I really enjoy Stephen King. Aside from that, I read, I'm trying to think of some contemporary non-fantasy sci-fi people that I read. I can't think of too many right now. I'm just coming out of having to do that. So I'm kind of on a free range bent of reading just as much pop fiction as I possibly can, because when you're getting your degree, they're like, oh, please read the greats. And the greats are wonderful. But now I'm like, oh my gosh, I can read whatever I want to read.
I too have a bachelor's in English, although mine is in literature and not creative writing. No minor. When I was getting my bachelor's degree, my advisor told me that I could either get a minor or I could just take more classes and prepare for graduate school. I almost have my master's degree in English literature. I am working on my thesis. I've been working on my thesis for a very long time, because even those of us who've been doing this for a very long time and know what we're doing, we still procrastinate and we still take forever to do things. And so that should be done any day now. At some point it'll be done, and then I'll have my master's degree. And I will eventually be getting a PhD in English, although not right away. Because what I want to do is teach. I was a teaching assistant for 3 years as well. I taught 101, which is a sort of introductory composition course, only twice in my 3 years, and I taught 102, the second half of the sequence, every other semester that I was a TA. So I've taught that class a lot. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoy teaching. Why I decided to become an English major is very similar to Becca. I like to read. But I also really like to write. And it's just I just love the idea of just getting a degree where all I had to do was read and write all the time. And I really enjoy doing it. My critical focus is Victorian literature. Specifically on the Bronte sisters. And my thesis is on looking at the Bronte sisters as a community of writers creating what I call an attachment narrative. It's very boring, and I'm sure none of you actually care. So I'm not going to really go into it. It's nowhere near as nice and accessible and interesting as Becca's thesis. So So we'll skip on mine in detail unless you guys are really, really interested. If I get a lot of questions about it, maybe I'll talk about it. But as a result, you know, I've read everything the Bronte sisters have ever written. I am a particularly big fan of Wuthering Heights. It's probably one of my favorite books of all time. It may be my favorite, like, capital L literature book of all time. But I read some sci-fi and fantasy. I certainly enjoy sci-fi and fantasy, not nearly to the degree Becca does. But my wife and I, who is not Becca, my wife and I have a pretty extensive sci-fi and fantasy collection. But it is mostly my wife's. I have read I read a lot of contemporary fiction. I almost did my thesis on Bret Easton Ellis, and because apparently I really love things that depress the hell out of me. I read a lot of John Green. So The Fault in Our Stars it's up there if I have to list favorite books. I can't answer the what's your favorite book question. I don't think any English major can really accurately answer the what's your favorite book question, but The Fault in Our Stars is up there. If you haven't read it, you should. But anyway, so that's me. That's where I am, and so we just thought maybe we'd introduce ourselves and let you know what we're about. A little bit more.
Actually, we should talk about how we met.
Oh yeah, we should do that. That'd be fun. So the story of how I met Becca is that Becca was what they call an instructional assistant. They call them instructional assistants as a master, I think. Yeah. An instructional assistant at the university where we both got our master's degree when I was coming in, and it was it was one of the sort of like sessions where one of the GAs that had been there for a while was talking. His name was Brian.
Was it Brian?
It was Brian. Yeah, yes. Yeah. It was a very interesting presentation. Maybe that's sort of looking up later. But the point was that Becca got a text message. Mm-hmm. So Becca got a text message, and this is what it sounded like. And I knew who I wanted to hang out with for the next 2 to 3 years, and so that's sort of how we met, I guess. I mean, that's at least how I became aware of you. Yeah,
I led a few of the sessions. I had a couple of talks. Yeah. During the 8-week, welcome to being a TA.
So that's how we met, and then after that, I think that we really didn't start hanging out until you were hanging out with Ashley. Yeah. And then we sort of re-met.
Yeah, Ashley was sharing an office with Jim. But, I mean, I also then met Jim's wife, Arwen, who has, the best name in the world. And I was kind of like, oh, we're going to be best friends.
So you probably won't see Arwen on this channel, but she exists, I promise. So then we've been sort of friends ever since. And you know, we're both gamers. We're both gamers, and we both, you know, like sci-fi and fantasy and have a lot of interests in common, and also happen to still be in town, which is not the case for everyone we know. So
it's a small college town, and usually people get out. At some point, we'll both get out, and then you'll just see separate videos.
I hope at some point we're both going to get out.
Oh, please. At some point, we'll escape.
And then we'll do the split videos, but we'll tackle that when we come to it. Mm-hmm. One of the things I would like to do is maybe book recommendation videos. Not necessarily just lists of book recommendations, but maybe if you put in comments what kinds of things you're interested in or what kind of books you like, then maybe we'll take some of those comments and then respond to it with book recommendations of books that you may not have read and you might like because you like this book. Yeah. You know, and I like doing that. I like giving people book recommendations. It's one of the things that I feel like I have authority to do. Yeah. So
same here.
So that would be good.
We both have authors that we preach from the rooftops. So if you want, we will preach you some authors.
Yeah, and they're not always fun things to read, but they're good things to read. I think is, and maybe we'll cover some of that stuff depending on how the channel goes. But. Yeah.
So this is us.
So we'll see you next week.
Hopefully, please.